Hello, everyone. My name is Spencer Walsh. Welcome to today's show. Thank you so much for joining us here today. Really do appreciate it as always. And we got a good one for you on the show today. Let's get into it. We got some of the latest news coming out with regards to this fake Elector plot. And really, the key point is, again, willing knowledge and kind of records that show that the people pushing the fake Elector plot to steal the 2020 election knew that they were doing it and accepted internally that Joe Biden had actually won, but just wanted to essentially steal it for their own personal benefit. Give you all the details on that. Also, Ohio heads to the polls today for a big special election on an abortion referendum. We'll give you the full preview and breakdown of that. Also, piece from John Schwartz recapping a recent book that details how the top 10% stole $47 trillion via intellectual welfare. That should be a pretty interesting read to get into and delve into. Making John Dillinger look like small potatoes. Also, finally, we have very exciting news as we get ready for the primary against Eric Adams coming up in 2025. We'll take a look at why that is such a big deal and who could possibly stand up to challenge them. That's today on your Monday edition of Newsflash. Thanks so much for joining us. All right, so it really is, as we saw recently, Trump has been indicted for the third time. Again, 3 out of 4 on this one. It is the Jack Smith, broader kind of not really just about January 6th, but really just the general conspiracy to go in there and steal the election. That is really what Jack Smith is by all accounts after. That's what he's looking into. And it does make a lot of sense because it was a thing that should be looked into. I think there's no denying that it really was something that needed to be looked into, needed to be processed, needed to be dealt with for the sake of our country and the fact that if there's someone who does try to do this, I think if we're serious about being a country, you could talk all day long about how dumb norms are or whatever, but if someone does make a concerted effort to try and overthrow the election, which these people clearly did, then I think there should be some accountability. I don't think that's the craziest thing to say. And one of those biggest plots centers around the fake elector plots. You may be hearing that, you may be like, what the hell is a fake elector? Essentially, a fake elector or deepfake elector plots where, in several of these key states, Georgia was one of them, Pennsylvania was another one of them, where they essentially would try to, through the independent state legislature theory, which was also recently rejected by the Supreme Court, which essentially said that in Republican state legislatures, which pretty much all the swing states that were kind of won by Biden in the election, whether it be Pennsylvania, whether it be Arizona, whether it be even Michigan and things like that, up in 2022 had red legislatures that they would essentially come in, step up, and Georgia is another example of this. Would come in, step up, and appoint their own electors to go to the Capitol on January 6th and vote for Trump, pretty much ignoring the electors selected by the actual government for the actual group that won. Pennsylvania, I think, tried to do this. Georgia as well, and it is a center focal point of the Trump indictment. So, they're not just saying, "Oh, you didn't just say it. You didn't just say that the election was stolen. You didn't just go through all, the legal recourse and let the justice system play itself out. You actually went and you did some more serious things. You did things like put all these slates up in places like Pennsylvania and other places." So this here is in the Washington Post. 6 weeks after the 2020 election, senior campaign officials for Donald Trump calls together a group of loyal Pennsylvania Republicans to walk them through how they would convene 2 days later to cast the state electoral votes for the sitting president. So this is, again, in these Pennsylvania Republicans in the state legislature are kind of being walked through by Trump to kind of declare the appropriate electors in Trump's eyes to go to the Capitol on January 6th and vote for him. But, as we know, Joe Biden had already been declared the certified winner in Pennsylvania. So it got to be pretty awkward. So a number of the Republicans on the December 12th conference call who had volunteered to serve as Trump electors if he won the state said they were uncomfortable portraying themselves as legitimate electors, according to the federal indictment filed against Trump last week, accusing him of trying to overturn the 2020 election. So this is really more where you start to see the full, true picture of it. Because one of the key things that these prosecutors are going to be looking to prove is that Trump knew, or at least was told, that this is BS. He faced some internal resistance and willfully continued on with it. Anyway, this is a great example of that internal resistance that he was facing from these just random used car dealership salesmen that kind of worm their way into public office to be Pennsylvania Republicans in the state house. They're like, yeah, I don't want to go part of this kind of cockamamie conspiracy to overthrow the results of the 2020 election, which, to be fair, does make a certain amount of sense. And this is, this was what was apparently told to Trump, according to this indictment. The campaign officials, led by lawyer Rudy Giuliani, told the electors they were meeting on a contingency basis only. The indictment says after the call, campaign officials circulated language to add to the Pennsylvania elector certificates to be submitted to Washington, asserting that the votes were intended to count only if Trump prevailed in litigation in the state. So that's essentially what they were saying. Just in case Trump prevails in litigation, we flip it. You guys won't. Then you guys can go as legitimate electors. But they were really kind of expecting them to go anyway. Campaign officials urged one another to keep this new language under wraps so that other states would not copy it. If it gets out, we change the language for PA. It could snowball, one campaign wrote, according to the indictment. One campaign official wrote, according to the indictment. So the allegation that the campaign officials sought to prevent electors in other states from learning about the language used in Pennsylvania is a key new revelation in the 4-count, 45-page federal indictment, which accuses Trump of a sprawling effort to retain power illegally with the help of 6 co-conspirators. Trump's defenders have long insisted that the electoral scheme was legal because the states met as mere placeholders to be activated only if the campaign won in court. So that is their kind of backup plan. Again, they're kind of saying, this was just for if we did really well and somehow got past all these lawsuits. That's the only time that any of these electors would actually do anything. But other than that, we're just pretty much chilling. We just want Joe Biden to win. We just want everything to go well, right? No. Legal expert, though, said that proving that Trump and his co-conspirators were lying when they said that the electors were meeting just in case, will be a central challenge of a winning conviction. Especially important may be the experience in Pennsylvania, where new interviews by the Washington Post revealed the extent of discomfort with the plan by Trump electors. In 5 other states, Republicans did not hedge. Instead, they signed paperwork claiming to be electors for the president and casting their votes for Trump, even though he had lost those states. Electors in the 7th state, though, New Mexico, which is pretty funny, because New Mexico is a pretty solidly blue state, included contingency language similar to that in Pennsylvania. The Trump campaign then moved ahead with plans to use all the certificates to pressure Congress not to certify the Electoral College count for Joe Biden. The spokesman for Trump did not respond to requests for comment of the story. The Trump campaign denounced the indictment as nothing but more than the latest corrupt chapter in a politically motivated witch hunt by the Biden administration. Included in the evidence special counsel Jack Smith offers is the fact that several of those campaign officials fretted internally about the legitimacy of the scheme, which goes more to this kind of central challenge of the winning conviction, which is going to be that they really knew, or that their intention truly was that this was not going to be just a contingency, but it was going to be for real, like that they wanted to send no matter what. And they were really essentially lying to the people in Pennsylvania and New Mexico. And they were saying that, we really want to take this all the way. This is serious. We're not playing around here. But essentially proving that story was a lie. It still seems like they are working on that, but more and more evidence is coming out on the day today. And certainly in this indictment, some pretty damning evidence that kind of does point to the fact that Trump was pretty well aware of what he was doing. And the fact that, and also, but, within himself and his top team, but also did receive some pushback from others, including these fake electors that were saying, yeah, you know what, I don't know if I really want to be fake electors here. All right. We will continue to obviously follow that story for you. But with that being said, let's move on to our next story right now. It's a pretty big one. All right, so we continue today with this. This is in Ohio. For more than a century, Ohio voters have been able to amend the state constitution with a simple majority vote. That could end on Tuesday because the state's Republican-controlled legislature has called for a special election that would raise the bar for amendments from a simple majority to 60% of the vote. The reason is no secret. Since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade last year, voters across the country in multiple elections have approved ballot measures protecting the right to abortion. A similar election has been scheduled for November in Ohio, and legislatures are hoping the higher bar for passing amendments will lead to its defeat. So they're essentially saying on this kind of special election, they're really trying to, speed it up and really doing kind of an incredibly shifty process here by pushing this to the floor in such a special way, or in front of the voters in such a special way, and in such a quick way, although there has been some pretty intense campaigning back and forth in this. I know the Ohio Senate candidate that is trying to challenge Sherrod Brown and another Democratic Ohio politician had a big debate on this. Because it really is pretty clear, and a big part of the campaign, very smartly by the Ohio Democratic side, has been to say, they're trying to do this to stop you from having your voice heard on abortion, which is, an issue that they, frankly, are going to win on every time with a good chunk of, pretty much all of independents and a good chunk, even two of Republicans. The blowback has been pretty withering. Beyond denunciations from the legislature's usual liberal critics, there have been bipartisan statements from governors and other former office holders, including John Kasich of Ohio, a Republican. He wrote on Twitter in April that he watched voters reject policies that he and his legislative majority had backed, and it never occurred to me to try to limit Ohioans' right to do that. It wouldn't have been right then, and it isn't right now. Once Ohio was a quintessential swing state, now on issues as education, voting, and abortion, is an exemplar of a nationwide phenomenon. One-party-controlled legislatures, almost invariably Republican ones, changing the rules of the democratic process to extend their control even further. The 2022 election brought the single-party control of governor's office and legislature trifecta control, as they call it, from one party to 39 states, the most in at least 3 decades. In 29 states, 20 Republican states have veto-proof supermajorities that control both houses of the state legislatures. This has given legislatures, many of them heavily gerrymandered, extraordinary power to exert influence and to stay in power. We can kind of do whatever we want. Matt Huffman, the powerful Ohio State Senate president, told the Columbus Dispatch in a 2022 profile, "Few disagree, and Ohio has some company." Last month, the Alabama legislature shrugged off a federal court order upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court and drew a political map that gave the state one majority-black congressional district instead of the two the court rulings mandated. How can they stop that? Well, with our federal system, it's pretty damn hard. In April, Tennessee legislators expelled legislators expelled two Democrats because they staged a protest in the state House chambers. The Democratic legislatures have already been sent back by voters in special elections. But in Texas, the Republican legislature this year abolished the nonpartisan election administration post in counties with more than 3.5 million people. In other words, Democratic Houston, and gave the Republican Secretary of State authority to take over election administration there for good cause. Okay, so we're going to put off Brexit by a few more years at least. The Florida legislature then set the baseline for such moves in 2019 when it added restrictions that essentially rolled back an amendment to the state constitution approved by 65% of voters that restored voting rights to people who completed prison sentences. And this is, really kind of an interesting situation because, as you know, the state legislatures, a lot of people like to say, are, the most down-to-earth, closest, most important level of democracy. But really, they have, in a lot of times, just because they kind of represent small constituencies and are kind of, more down to earth with their voting base, does not really mean that they are, going to be the perfect people to come in and, decide this stuff. They are a lot of times the richest people in the given area, some of the, most wealthy, most well-connected people that are often really invested in by right-wing kind of reactionary big groups, for example, like ALEC, which are really designed to shift every type of, major state legislature lawmaking process to the right, make it more reactionary, and make corporate influence far, far stronger than anything that any average person can even try and pull off. So the Florida legislature, then they set the baseline for this, but in Ohio, it really is a very, very interesting situation because it's a kind of, again, another one of these broader trends of the state legislatures, which, by the way, have been used since the beginning of this country to do incredibly corrupt things. There used to be no primaries for the state reps. There used to all be, I think, didn't senators used to be selected by state representatives? It used to be, a big time where, at least you vote for your state rep, and then your state rep selects your senator. But now, obviously, we're in a position where you can have the direct election of the senator, but it didn't used to be that way. And it's just been a way for the kind of given elite of a certain area, whether it be, if you're in, Washington State, like the lumber elite, whether if you're in Texas, the oil elite, if you're in New York, the financial elite would kind of come together and make decisions on behalf of the people in the state legislatures in kind of their own little kind of separate prism, which is kind of a different center of power from the more powerful people in Washington, D.C., but still a very, very powerful force that was in the state, really able to control a lot of policy. And this is really a return to that type of view of American democracy, which is, there are certain people in the legislatures that kind of know better, that are, wizened, respected community leaders, that they want to have their voices heard when it comes to, everything, and they get to have it first because they are, the true most upstanding people of the community. And, if they weren't, then how would they have even gotten into this position? That is the kind of mindset that these people will bring again, and again. And it really will be interesting to see how strong, this abortion tide is, but how strong, if any, there is a certain revulsion to, from Ohio voters. We still have a little bit of fight left in this country, even in Ohio, that people are still revolted by these powerful elites, even if it's local powerful elites in a certain situation, which, populate the state houses. By and large, trying to make decisions for them, trying to dictate the terms of their life to them on any major issue, whether it be felony voting in Florida, whether it be abortion rights in Ohio. Like, there is plenty of examples of this, as we just talked about down the line, and that is going to be a pretty critical, test. I think this coming up tomorrow, this vote is to see if there's still a little bit of fight left in Ohio, and really just the country at large, that they are not just going to cede away parts of their democracy, the ability to just, have a simple majority and make change in a quick and efficient way when there is a, strong desire, a strong vote to do it. It should be 50+1, in my opinion. It doesn't have to be, this insurmountable threshold, and if there's a significant change, just change it back the next year. It should not be that hard. And I am a big supporter of people having more voice than less, even if they change their mind. Let's hope that Ohio proves themselves to be as well come tomorrow. All right, now to our next story. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening and supporting Newsflash. We now have a brand new way for you to be heard if you want, whether a text message or a audio message. Please, no video messages. I really just do not think that's necessary. We have a new feedback box open for you. Ladies and gentlemen, it is officially open. SWRN702@gmail.com. Send a text message, send a voice message of no more than 30 seconds via the voice memos function. Either of those two options, and we will 100%, not going to find this guarantee anywhere else, We're going to play it on the show, listen to what you have to say, and it literally could be about anything. Well, if it's inappropriate, we won't play it, but it could be about anything. Thank you so much. This is my thank you to all the listeners who have stuck out with us and want to have their own voice in the show. SWRN702@gmail.com is the address. All right, let's get now to our next story. It's another great piece here by Jean Boyce. He writes, the bank robber John Dillinger is one of history's most famous thieves, absconding with the equivalent today of $7 million. You'd think if someone had stolen $7 million on each of 7 million separate crime sprees, you would have heard about it, right? But you'd be wrong. In 2020, the RAND Corporation, a think tank in Santa Monica, California, released a study with the humdrum title, Trends in Income from 1975 to 2018. RAND itself resides in the center of America's establishment. In the decades following its founding after World War II, it was largely funded by and served the needs of the military-industrial complex. Famously, Daniel Ellsberg was working at RAND when he sold the papers, talking about how the Vietnam War was a failure, and everyone knew it, and they would keep going anyway because they wanted to save face. And he released them to the New York Times, and the Pentagon Papers happened. Incredibly enough, this dreary-sounding paper describes what might be the largest material theft since human civilization began. It examines a simple question. If U.S. income inequality had remained at 1975 levels through 2018, how much more money would the bottom 90% of Americans have made during these 43 years? Put another way, how much additional wealth flowed to the top 10% during this time thanks to increased income inequality? If you have a but, you should hold on to it because the answer is $47 trillion. That is a number so large that it surpasses human understanding. There are only a few 100 billion stars in the Milky Way. 47 trillion is about twice the size of the U.S. gross domestic product annually. This raises an obvious question. Traditionally, this kind of upward concentration of wealth has required mass slaughter. How did America's elites pull this off without needing to mow thousands of us down in the streets? The answer could be found in the new book, The Big Myth: How American Business Taught Us to Loathe Government and Love the Free Market, written by Naomi Oreskes, a history of science professor at Harvard, and Eric M. Conway, a historian at Caltech's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, who previously collaborated on Merchants of Doubt, how a handful of scientists obscured the truth on issues from tobacco smoke to global warming. So, as they explain, the Big Myth grew out of their previous book. While writing Merchants of Doubt, they discovered that the groundwork for global warming denialism had been laid in the 1980s by prominent scientists who understood the reality of the situation quite well. However, these scientists were convinced believers in what Oreskes and Conway call market fundamentalism, borrowing from George Soros, one of market fundamentalism's loudest critics. This is a system of belief that holds that political and economic freedom are indivisible. So essentially saying that you absolutely need to, if political rights mean that you're also able to do whatever you want on the marketplace and the free, quote unquote, free market to take it over and make it less free for others, for your advantage, essentially. They quote the physicist Fred Singer, who wrote, "If we do not carefully delineate the government's role in regulating dangers, there is essentially no limit to how much the government can ultimately control our lives." In other words, government intervenes in the economy, such as laws removing lead from gas, carbon taxes, or mandated cooling off breaks for people working in 100-degree heat. This is what physicist Fred Singer says. Not only will it make us all poorer, but put us on the road to Stalinist tyranny. Hence, it's crucial to head them all off at the pass, even that if that requires a vast mass misrepresentation of observable fact. The worldview that was espoused there is such incoherent trivial that it's hard to believe that anyone with a functioning brainstem could buy into it. Meanwhile, market fundamentalists are oddly unconcerned with the government intervention that's profitable for large corporations. If you're my favorite recent example of this was all these venture capitalist Silicon Valley guys freaking out. And by the way, totally anti-bailout in any other situation, totally anti any other type of government intervention. But when it's Silicon Valley Bank, you get someone like David Sachs coming in and begging the government for his check. So it's really kind of going on. Meanwhile, we have these two paradoxical situations. But if you're an entrepreneur who boldly tries to manufacture and sell any of the pharmaceutical industry's patented products in a free market, you will quickly encounter the suffocating hand of the administrative state. Yet there are no Wall Street Journal op-eds decrying this injustice. There's also a reality that makes markets a human creation, not a phenomenon like gravity that would exist whether or not people ever came along. And since markets are created by us, it is legitimate and within our power to alter them to better serve our needs. Finally, though, there's the historical fact that no country has ever gone communist gradually, starting with minimum wage laws and ending up with gulags. Rather, it happened in various fell swoops in places with glaring injustices and vicious capitalistic inequality, and even then, generally has required contemporary wars. As a renowned Soviet expert George Kennan put it in 1946, communism is like malignant parasite which feeds only on diseased tissue. Therefore, Kennan believed every courageous and decisive measure to solve internal problems of our own society was a victory over communism. So again, this is going to be interesting to see. It can frame like New Deal era liberalism in terms of, just kind of regulating the markets, bringing them back under control as an active kind of anti-communist measure, which, probably in large parts of the United States, it did have that kind of effect when things could have gone down a much more, rebellious path at a few points in that history. So again, it's really, really important just broadly to understand this kind of stuff about markets. And a great piece here by John Schwartz, as always, to help us do so, because it really has been a remarkable transfer of wealth. And it's been, not only is the transfer of wealth so interesting with this kind of rapid kind of neoliberalization, financialization of the economy from around 1975, a great date to pick there, onwards. But I think just as interesting is, as Schwartz mentions this here, is that, people aren't really that worked up about it. It's not something that gets people all worked up. It's because they're, fed with a lot of kind of materialism or material things that kind of help them ease the pain a little bit. It's because it happened more gradually. I think both those could have something to it, but it's a question that I think will probably be pretty damn key to understanding what we do next and where we go from here when it comes to maybe, just maybe, making policies that will lower that gap just a little bit and returning some of that wealth back from the top 10% or even the top 0.1% or 1%, back down to everyday people. All right, let's go now to our final story. Recently, some in New York City labor and left circles have begun discussing the possibility of backing a primary challenge against incumbent Mayor Eric Adams, previously off the record but now made public by the New York Times. This is an idea whose time has come. Though he billed himself as a mayor for the working class, Adams has been a disaster for workers. His approach to every serious problem the city faces is more austerity and bureaucratic ineptitude. He's not even a competent austerian. Probably one of the most frustrating things of all. Faced with the solution of migrants in need of temporary shelter, Adams' solution has been nothing short of barbaric. Seeking a court order to repeal New York City's obligation to provide shelter for those in need, a humane law that has been on the books since 1979. Rather than offer a respite for this group of living, breathing human beings in dire straits, he's repeatedly demonized and rejected them. All because, I guess he doesn't want to get called out by Republicans. I think the best thing to kind of understand is with Eric Adams, and throughout his short tenure in office, he has single-handedly given Republicans, especially New York Republicans, every single major issue that they have used to attack him on. He has bought into them. He has fed into them. He has swallowed them hook, line, and sinker. Whether it be crime, that was completely over-dramatized, hyped up by the New York Post. The genesis of that fear, the genesis of the tough on crime, fear-mongering about crime type of movement came entirely from Eric Adams. He coasted to, freaking out about, we got to do something about crime. I'm going to be tough. I'm a former police captain. And when the midterms came around, all the people in the suburbs voted really heavily Republican, cost the Democrats dearly. But of course, it helps Eric Adams, just pop right back in. Which was pretty funny to see. When it comes to migrants, when it comes to the situation of Greg Abbott trying to demonize migrants, trying to send them up to New York City and give them a quote unquote taste of their own medicine. Adams has failed to even just begin to plan for, begin to even act like, to even begin to pretend like he wants to make a step in the right direction when he wants to. If he wants to, it's just, he's not even trying to say, oh, we're trying to house these people. It's a very tough situation, but we're in New York City. We are an open, progressive, tolerant place. We want everyone to come. This is a, melting pot, all that kind of rhetoric about New York City. He hasn't even tried to live up to that. He's essentially said, screw you, get out of here. We don't need you. And he has not even tried to, live up to those ideals because as he would frame it, yeah, migrants are bad. Immigration is bad. This frames into completely the Republican agenda because it comes down to this basic truism about Democratic politics and Republican politics and just generally American politics. When it comes to a Republican light like Eric Adams or a normal Republican, you're always going to have people choose the normal Republican. And that is what people, not just in the city per se, because a lot of people in the city actually, better understood the reality of the situation with regards to crime in 2022 midterms. But when it came to out of the city, they were certainly quick to choose that Republican in Lee Zeldin pretty fast. And even, people like George Santos and Mike Lawler snuck in because of Eric Adams and his continued demonization of really his own party and his own supposed political movement. It was really kind of disaster to state. And again, back to this kind of migrant, we're a melting pot. Give us your tired, give us your poor, the stuff written on the Statue of Liberty here. And again, it's not like you are supposed to have 5-star hotels waiting for these migrants that you didn't really plan for, but you have been given a situation. You're mayor of New York. Why don't you at least work towards being better? No, they're turning them away. Migrants are now camping out on the city sidewalks. Daily Beast recently reported that hundreds were sleeping outside of Roosevelt Hotel, not far from the Yale Club, and some of the city's most profitable finance firms. Speaking of that right to shelter, migrants are the only people Adams is failing to house. Homelessness has become impossible to ignore in any New York City neighborhood or on any subway line. People are sleeping on the streets everywhere. Mothers are begging with their small children on the trains, going around, they're doing these things where they go around with candy, trying to sell candy now. These scenes feel like something from a country suffering from a serious depression or economic collapse, but that's not what's happening. The problem is a lack of political will on the part of Eric Adams to help suffering people. When it comes to the housing problem, whether it's migrants or homelessness or New Yorkers, the mayor's office claims that while compassion is limitless, our resources are not. That's rank nonsense. New York City is one of the richest cities in the world. New York City could solve this problem, but his austerity policies and utter incompetence are all that has been standing in the way. Legal Aid Society's Joshua Goldfein explained why in an interview with NPR. There's a staffing shortage crisis in every city agency in New York City. As a result, most city agencies can't perform their basic functions in the way that they're supposed to. An example, many homeless people are living in shelters despite having found permanent housing and qualifying for vouchers. They can move into their new homes tomorrow if there was someone at the appropriate agency to write the check to their new landlord. That would create more space for migrants and help anyone in need of shelter. Speaking of austerity, the city's recent budget cuts were horrendous. The mayor insisted on slashing the education program at Rikers, the city's most notorious jail, cuts that will make it only more difficult for people to thrive after they've been released. And City Comptroller Brad Lander had pointed out that while the mayor tried to use the migrant crisis as an excuse for austerity in other areas, the recent budget failed to make the investments that would end that quote-unquote crisis by addressing migrants' long-term needs. And he called the budget a short-sighted approach to a pressing budget and human issue. And the thing is, New York City has many progressive council members, including several socialists. With the less reactionary mayor, these lawmakers could do more than simply fight austerity measures. They could work together to solve the city's problems. Well, some people would say that's a Freudian slip, but I think the only one causing any problems in office right now is Eric Adams. And, a lot of the city and even some of the state government has really moved to fight against it. In time where socialists and progressive ideas have great traction, he's openly declared war on socialists and the left, blaming humane policies like bail reform without any evidence for urban crime. This false narrative has again become a useful right-wing talking point, which Adams has really seemed utterly indifferent to. Adams is far from the mayor for the working class. He is a mayor for the 1%, and they stepped up to support him. He's a magnet for rich owners, especially those from the real estate industry, probably the biggest single political constituency of New York. And it's time for a working class challenge to this mayor. The left can beat Adams in 2025, but only with real unity and hard work. No single group can do this on its own. The DSA have built significant power in the city in recent years, but the money involved and the size of the city make this race too big for them. The same could be said of the Working Families Party or any of the most politically active progressive unions like 1199 SEIU. The last mayoral primary was a disgrace with no candidate disparate left constituencies could get behind and a wide range of mediocre careerists running for personal advancement and no sense of the seriousness it takes for left-leaning candidates to beat those backed by the donor class. This time, it's starting that people in leadership positions seem to be appreciating the need for unity. Anyone running just to make a statement or build their brand should be discouraged. We have a city to win, says Lisa Featherstone there, and the Jackman could not agree more. It's really, really important here that it needs to be unified, because if you look at what happened last time, there was every single possible would-be left progressive faction, from Yang to maybe even a little bit of Catherine Garcia to, the Warren types, to the Yang weirdos, to the Bernie types, to the, all those working class people, all those, PMC people that would support a left-wing candidate. All of them had their own candidates to support. No more this time. That's got to change. And hopefully our kind of political leadership can organize to fix that and sort that out. Definitely something we're going to be continuing to follow. We're back on Wednesday. It's Newsflash.